Tune in to the FinTech Files for exclusive interviews with FinTech executives and thought leaders. We will talk about how the industry will overcome the crisis that has marked the start of the decade, how it can be part of the solution, and how the financial world will evolve in the next decade. This is your host, George Alaferis from Arama.
Today, I'm excited to speak to Kate Morgenstern, who has a unique role mixing sales and marketing at Fincad. Fincad is a leading risk management software for fixed income and derivatives. We will discuss what it takes to manage the sales process for large, strategic enterprise deals, working with quants, personal finance in times of crisis, and a lot more. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So let's start first with a few questions about confinement. So where are you confined now?
So I'm in Northwest London, and I'm lucky enough to have space to myself and quiet through the day, although at the weekend that becomes a little bit more of a challenge.
All right. And what's your working from home setup? Did you have to make a lot of changes?
Yeah, so I have a laptop, which is less, I'd rather have a few screens, but I could have gone, I guess, to go and get some. But yeah, I've got a nice enough view over the street, sitting in a bay window with a desk. So could be a lot worse off. I don't have to work from my bed or anything. So that's kind of helpful.
All right, that's great. And how much of a change is it based on your, usual working schedule? You work at Fincad, you do a lot of traveling.
Yeah, for me, we do travel quite a bit abroad. So obviously I had to cancel quite a lot of work trips, which may or may not have been a good thing. But we kind of, as a company, a lot of people work from home a lot of the time, and we're spread across sort of 4 different offices. So we're quite used to working remotely or having kind of phone calls instead of meeting in person. So from that side, not such a big change. But from a personal kind of perspective, I'm normally one of the people that likes to go in the office because it's nice to have a bit of social interaction and chat to your team. And we at least most people go in at least a couple of times a week. So there's a difference between working from home, I say, every day for a very long period to just, having a couple of days at home here and there, where it feels more like a luxury than maybe it does at the moment.
I was just going to ask, has the team made any change? Do you meet up on a regular basis over Zoom or something like that?
Yeah, we have daily calls every day. So with the full team, so everyone in sales and marketing, all on one call every day. And then I have with my kind of team, who are both quite junior, we've just put in place daily call, but at the end of the day, just check what we've done, what we're doing the next day, and just make sure we're kind of on target. I think it's more important to make sure you have clear objectives than maybe normal. It's usually important, but you can kind of maybe get away with it when there's lots of you around and you can kind of change things. But when people are kind of working remotely all the time, I think it's important to give them something to head towards. And some people prefer, I think, I'm personally being quite strict of a 9 to 5 or maybe 9 till 6, or having a call in the evening if I need to, and making sure I take a break for lunch. Whereas I think some people are kind of maybe starting quite late and finishing very late, or, just working to their own schedule, which is fine. But I think therefore it becomes really important to make sure you've got kind of clear objectives and what you're expecting from people.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a bit different with more junior people who maybe are not fully onto the rails, and who have a different, they haven't been molded yet in years of corporate life.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of, for me, it's a bit more kind of trying to put that rigor in, which is a challenge when people kind of have only got a couple of months experience. So yeah, it's a very different challenge from that perspective versus working with people who are kind of a little bit more used to it.
All right, great. A few questions now about your current role and your career. So first, how did you get into finance and now fintech?
Finance, I think I followed a very standard path, studied economics at university, and then everyone around me was applying for jobs and internships. So applied for an internship and kind of fell on the finance bandwagon. So I was lucky enough to graduate in the last recession, which was great, and so found one of the few jobs that were out there within finance. I'd say it did teach me quite a lot, but it meant that I I guess, grew relatively quickly because there was a lot to learn very quickly at that particular point in time. So I started in structured equities, doing structuring, marketing, sales, trading, bits and pieces all over, because the company I was working for was a little bit smaller. So you just got involved in everything. And then I moved after that to a more traditional kind of equity derivative sales role. I was then made redundant, which is quite common at the end of the day in finance. And to be honest, it was, I'd say, there was definitely a silver lining. I took some time out after that to explore various different options and see what I wanted to do. And I realized I'd like to work in a slightly smaller company, have a bit more control over what was going on day to day. But I didn't particularly want to go back into the investment banking world. And I did want to, I guess, utilize some of my skill set and knowledge from that to move forward. So I was approached by an ex-colleague who was at Fincad at the time, and the rest is history, really. So I've been at Fincad for just over 3 years. And my role, I kind of look after, came in, it was my first sort of tech sales role. So there was a lot to learn, especially on the technology side for me. And I then kind of gradually took over some of the kind of marketing strategy and so on as well, to sit where I am at the moment.
Great. Yeah, we've got a very similar background, as I was myself, in structuring and derivatives.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to dig a bit further into, this transition, because when I came out of the role, I found myself without a lot of applicable skills, because I know a lot of derivatives, I don't know, Black-Scholes or whatever, and equities, but it doesn't help, to on a daily basis. And I know a lot of colleagues of mine have the same thing, and some of them have become artists, personal trainers, things that are really unrelated. Yours is, of course, more related. Let's call it fintech. But how did you go about learning about on the technology side of things? And tell us a bit more about the transition.
Yeah, so I'd say actually the biggest transition was really the change of pace. So when you're on a trading floor, everything is kind of needed now or yesterday. And it's very high pressure and continual bombardment, I would say, with both news, input, output. It's just crazy, as people would expect. And then kind of moving to a slightly smaller company, and our sales cycles could be anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years. So the pace is completely different. And I would say for me personally, that was the biggest challenge. On the technology angle, I'm very lucky. A lot of the people I work with are very nice, very bright, and very happy to answer my questions. And at the beginning, my questions were probably quite stupid and very simplistic. But even now, when I have a question, they're very happy to sort of sit down and explain it or ask. So that's really helpful. And I think that really helped with the transition. I did take some time off in between as well, and kind of worked in some startups and doing all sorts of other things. So by the time I came to Fincad, I was sort of raring to get going and actually work in kind of a slightly more structured way, which I think helped. But yes, that I think it was that change of pace. But I'd say, I don't know if you find the same, coming from a sort of big corporate and actually banking background, I've realized it's really instilled like a lot of rigor and professionalism and a particular way of working and high standards that I think actually does me a lot of benefit and is what I take away, taking away the technical kind of side of things. It's that on the soft side, it's very much like how to work with some very challenging people, how to negotiate or and also not take things personally, and then how to maintain high standards under pressure. And I think that is particularly valuable that you can kind of take with you. I don't know if you found the same.
There's so many questions about what you just said about the marketing role and the transition. But let's start first, if you can tell me a little bit more about Fincad and what kind of clients you deal with.
Yeah, so Fincad is a fintech company, but we sell software for risk management, particularly for derivatives and fixed income. So we sell to generally large financial institutions, sometimes smaller ones. We do have some corporate clients, but the majority of our work is for banks, hedge funds, insurance companies, pension companies. And we work with a variety of people within that. So it might be treasury, risk management, model validation. So for people who aren't so familiar with kind of maybe the finance world and see it sort of as one big blob, within each of the large institutions, you have lots of different roles. And we kind of try and sort of pinpoint different roles within the companies where we're sort of we actually add value. So particularly, we're quite a niche product, which in itself is a challenge, but because you then have a narrower target audience that we're trying to speak to. We're also quite expensive, so not in comparison to our competitors particularly, but it's a large investment, and it's normally a strategic decision that sort of is moving someone towards requiring us, at least for our larger scale products, and less for our tactical solutions, which are maybe slightly easier to kind of sell in. But for the larger scale products, it's really about I guess trying to speak to the right people, but making sure you're speaking at a senior enough level. And it's about timing. So I guess very often it's kind of making sure that you sort of speak to them at the right time and that you're on the list when they look for new vendors for a particular solution. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, very good.
Sure,
And it's something, and so you're also really at you're working with cutting edge clients, said hedge fund, banks, people who are already very sophisticated, and your product is also very sophisticated, right, in terms of calculation capabilities, cloud, machine learning, and things like that. That makes as well the process a lot, like you said, a lot longer, and it's big tickets, or it's strategic from the part of the client. So how do you manage that, and how do you manage potentially the challenges compared to what your previous role was, where you buy and sell on a daily basis? How do you manage the uncertainty and the fact that clients might start a conversation today and decide next year, and you have to be a part of it, right? You have to somehow stay with them for a year.
I mean, I'd say a lot of it's resilience. So from any salesperson, I think they'd kind of probably say the same thing. You have to be okay with someone saying no to your face. You have to be okay with putting work in and it not going anywhere, because you can't control everything. I mean, you just have to look at the current market environment, see how little you actually have control of. So from a kind of long-term sort of sales strategy, it's really trying to build trust from the client, offer help where you can, pester sometimes, but know when to back off a little bit, because you don't want to irritate them, because at the end of the day, you want to build a long-lasting relationship. And as a company, we're about building long-lasting relationships. So educating the client on kind of what you're trying to do. And then if they're not at that point, know that you've kind of given them enough and that you're staying in touch enough in order that when they are ready to purchase, you're the one that they call.
All right, great. And so we're talking about risk management, and as we speak now, mid-March, we're still very deep in the coronavirus crisis, and so I guess it's a relevant topic. But I guess it's also creating some challenges for you, because you are talking to enterprise solution, enterprise client, enterprise software, and everybody's working from home. So what are the challenges, just in terms of the setup, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge at the moment, especially for it's actually starting to improve, but we found the first few weeks, like just getting hold of anyone was an absolute nightmare. You can tell, I mean, we're lucky as a company, as I said already, that, we're relatively used to working from home and already set up for that. But a lot of the big banking clients or hedge funds, they're not set up for working from home. They're used to working with lots of screens and lots of people and all the people they need around them. And they're also set up in a way that things for approvals are assigned by committee, and committees are all in person, and all those discussions happen in person. So that, I think, for them has been a particular transition and a particular challenge. So for us on the other end of it, just getting hold of the people you want to speak to is a challenge, and trying to move things forward. We've got a few kind of interesting deals going on, but making sure that you're trying to actually speaking to the right people when you're not going to a meeting and they can't just ask someone along, or it's the lack of ability to have those kind of slightly softer conversations where I'm personally finding the challenge, and so is my team, things like from the account management side, a lot of people getting a hold of them is a challenge. So they may not come back on emails. A lot of people don't have necessarily forwarding on their phones. So the phone numbers we have are their landlines, which obviously doesn't help when they're not at home or they're not being forwarded to their personal or work mobiles. So that is a particular challenge from our perspective. I'm hoping that this kind of shows to clients why it's required that they're set up for this going forward, and to make sure that they're more kind of adaptable. But I think that's a process, and that's going to take time for people to get used to. People in digital and tech are kind of quite used to it, and sort of maybe take it slightly for granted that we have those things at our fingertips. But actually, a lot of the financial sector has not been set up for this, and they work in a very traditional way. From a more social side, maybe this will disrupt it and allow for more flexible working and the rest of it. But for now, it's kind of riding through that transition and kind of just persisting. And resilience is kind of the way. Yeah, I'll use that word again, but I think it's really key at the moment.
Oh yeah, sure. I think from a business point of view, it's not setting ourselves. There's a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'm going to come out of these stronger growth charts," etc. But I think going through it is and surviving is a great thing to do, and should be all happy that we managed to
yeah,
hang on
exactly.
there. And yeah, that's very interesting actually, because we see finance, or if you're not into it, you can see there's a lot of things which are naturally cutting edge, quantitative, technological. Yet the way the industry works is actually not that advanced, right? So I guess we talk a lot about the acceleration of digitization during this crisis. Do you think people might come out of this and say, okay, we need to change, we need to put more things in the cloud, we need to, I don't know, do some changing to the way?
I mean, I'm an optimist. I do hope things do change, but for the better. I think that, yes, moving towards the cloud is probably something that will be accelerated potentially through this, or at least the ability to have kind of centralized systems and allow for people to kind of access it from multiple locations. Of course, when it comes to banks, they have a lot of concern, and understandably so, around client data and security. So that's something that clearly will need to be kind of looked at. But yes, I think that it should kind of at least speed up that push. It's already been moving that way, but just maybe slightly slower than other kind of industries. So yeah, I'd hope that it speeds that up.
Yeah, I don't think it's definitely not gonna go slower than how big is the change when we all get out of this? Well, we don't know, but I think it's a lot of, some things are a bit like smoking. If you manage to do a few months out of the bad habit, maybe you can change for good. Well,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I was chatting actually to my mum about it, and we were saying the longer this goes on for, the more lasting the change will be, because changing habits is hard, and it's hard for anyone. But as you say, kind of like smoking or exercise, if you start doing it for a longer period of time, the longer you do it for, the more it becomes ingrained in your psyche, and the more used to it you become. And I think even just working from home, people, after what I've been doing this now for 6 weeks, I know that's longer than usual, but we had confirmed cases in our building. So we started working from home earlier than others. And I think that a lot of people will be challenged to go back to going into an office every day, especially if they've got a long commute. So, that I think that in general will be interesting. So the longer this goes on for, I wonder how systemic that change will be.
Great. So just going back again into Fincad, and you mentioned about your involvement, which is quite particular because you're doing sales and marketing at the same time. Could you tell us a bit how it works and how it works potentially with the other offices? Because Fincad is headquartered in Canada, right?
Yeah, so our head office is in Canada. We also have offices in New York, London, and Dublin. New York and London are really their kind of main sales offices, and we have account management based out of Dublin and Vancouver. Our marketing is sort of split. We don't really have kind of a full marketing lead. I've sort of been doing a lot of it in terms of the strategy and outreach, in terms of kind of working really sales, marketing, lead gen side of things. I personally have a strong belief that sales and marketing go hand in hand. And we have, there's 4 people sort of within the marketing team officially, 1 copywriter, someone who does sort of more on the marketing support side, and someone else who looks after really more on case of the brand and the website and those sorts of things. So where I've come in is really more around client lead generation. So whether that be through content, so creation of videos, trying to gain kind of more traction with the right sorts of people, whether that be sort of potentially with advertising, where I work hand in hand on kind of obviously with the brand side of things. And I think it's really tying up the marketing and sales strategy together. So if you have a really kind of top content piece, is then having the right events or engagement practices with those clients on those topics, making sure that your cold outreach or emails or personal outreach from the sales team is also on message, and it's all kind of linking up around the same sort of topic or theme, and really bringing that together. And when we do that in that tied up approach, whether it be like a piece of content going out and then following up afterwards, making sure that the people who've seen it are really followed up with another kind of interesting piece of content, and actually providing value to the people that we want to talk to, not just trying to get something from them all the time, but really try and offer value. That's sort of my methodology. It so far seems to be working in a positive light. I'd like to be doing more of it. We work in a very, up until recently, we've been working very EMEA centric, so very much Europe focused way. I don't really work in the US so much, but we'll see whether that changes going forward.
It's of
Not
course
take over the US per se, but more like the change. There's been some changes in structure internally.
Sure. And as you're embarking on this journey, and we've done a few projects together, how do you see it? It's hard as well to see how it's going, because I guess a lot of things are a bit on hold right now. But how do you see it going? How do you see, or maybe in an ideal world, how do you see it developing, Fincad down the line with your content marketing and other type of event strategies?
Interesting. I think given that the current situation, it's a bit challenging, obviously, to do events. So I have no idea how long it's going to be before we're able to do events again. I mean, we found them quite useful in terms of really engaging our network and giving people a kind of a chance to actually just talk to us, but also talk about a particularly relevant topic. We've also got to work out, dependent on where the product goes in the next year or so, and I'm not in control of that. We might have to be more specific in terms of our messaging and really tie together that outreach strategy with sales, kind of advertising, marketing, and then relevant content, and providing value through that content as well to our clients so that we actually engage that audience.
Yeah, talking about it's actually really interesting to talk a bit about the product, because it's something that is far beyond my personal, understanding knowledge of finance, but from what I've seen, from the visits I had, it's a highly technical product, and you have a lot of PhDs in science and maths, right, in your office, and that I guess gives a particularly, well, it's a different working environment. Could you tell us a bit about that, about what it is for people, I would say, like us, who have a business background and not a PhD in maths, to work in such a highly, almost scientific environment? Or
yeah, it's interesting. There can be sometimes some conflict.
I can imagine I can imagine it's and we don't want the whole detail, but
yeah, I mean, it's great to work with some really bright people and know that solve the problem. We sometimes come up against sort of more, very client-centric issues where it's not really about the detail, and we need to sort of rise up from that. But having the ability to go into the granular detail with people who are particularly specialist at that is great. It's also good, clients get a lot of value from it, and being able to engage with people like that. So yeah, I mean, there's always been a bit of a challenge on the marketing side of how technical should we be, and from the business side of things, we found a lot of drive coming more from being sort of high level, really business user focused. So like client centric in terms of what the client's getting from something versus necessarily always how it's done. And if they're interested in how it's done, we're lucky enough to have the technical people to be able to explain that. But yeah, from a marketing sales perspective, I think it's very much about like really putting together the use case. What's the client win? Why would the client buy something, rather than necessarily I don't know how a particular instrument is priced. That's not always of interest to them in the same way. It's more, I want to get the value of this instrument, and therefore I can accurately price this for my clients.
Sure. So do you find you have to do a lot of, let's say, education internally in terms of your own marketing endeavors?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I guess the way you answer it, something that could deserve a longer chat just about that. But let's move on to something else. Just to talk again about the last question about the industry, what do you think is the most exciting thing that is happening or could happen in the short term in terms of your industry and the business?
I think it's really the speed of deployment. So how easy it will be to get product out there. Things like the cloud offerings, I think, mean that you kind of get this continual development. So the quicker we have a cloud offering, but that type of work and that sort of development will sort of help us sort of solve client problems quicker, and also allow our current clients to sort of see the benefits of our work quicker. So I think that will be interesting over the next sort of 6 months to a year.
All right. So now, looking at your LinkedIn profile, I see you have multiple other activities. And in particular, you're involved in coaching some people about their finances, right? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so given the current crisis and a lot of people being made redundant or furloughed, I just decided I needed to do something a little bit to help. So together with an amazing coach that I know, we're pulling together some sort of 5-week coaching sessions. So just, 40 minutes a week for a group of people where they're from similar backgrounds and got similar issues, and trying to kind of walk them through sort of how to deal with being furloughed, how to keep going every day, how to budget properly. I'm obviously coming at it given I've worked in finance for a long time, from what to me seems relatively simple in terms of managing your money. For a lot of people, I've realized it isn't. So it started with some friends kind of complaining they didn't really know what to do or how they were dealing with this. And I'm lucky enough to have a job and be working. So I sort of thought, look, what else can I do to kind of offer some value? So yeah, with a colleague, yes, I guess she is a colleague now, but yeah, this amazing coach called Sarah. The two of us are sort of putting together this sort of little coaching plan, so 5 weeks. And I'm sort of doing some individual stuff with budgeting for individual people. So what's their outgoings, what's their income, etc. How can they amend that? What tips you could do? And then off the back of that, some people have got in touch wanting to kind of maybe put some content together around that to sort of help a broader network.
So would you be able to share a few tips for someone who's been
furloughed? I mean, some of the good things I've heard. Yeah, so a couple of people who've sort of had, obviously when people have had their income, I think cut, I think it's really important just to be really honest with yourself. So that can be quite challenging. But sitting down and kind of just writing down what your outgoings actually are, because a lot of people don't realize. So that might be that you put at the end of the day, open a spreadsheet, or you could use a notepad and paper. It doesn't really matter. You can write down your, say, rent or mortgage at the top, and then put out what your bills are, what your kind of outgoings are on food a week. At the moment, your food intake is probably higher for your weekly shop. But at the end of the day, I've also found, like everyone else, I'm not going out. So I'm therefore not spending any money going to pubs or bars or restaurants or doing anything really. So my outgoings have dropped dramatically. So being honest with yourself about maybe what they normally are, and then having a look over the last month to see really what you've actually been spending. If you've got apps like Monzo, or there are Moneybox, and there are quite a few of them, you can kind of look at your budgeting and it aggregates them into kind of spending buckets. And that's really helpful if you're someone that's not particularly great at keeping an eye on where your money's going. The other thing I think is a great tip is if you've got online banking, which most of us do, you can look through your direct debits, because a lot of the time you forget what you've signed up to, and it might be £5-6 a month here and there, so you don't really notice it. But actually, you've got a subscription to a magazine you never read, and you maybe are using your Audible, for example, for audiobooks, but actually you haven't downloaded a new audiobook in like 6 months. So go through your direct debits, see where you're spending money, and just cancel the ones that you're not using. That can be quite a quick way of saving a few pounds. So yeah, there's a few little things there. And I think that being honest with yourself is a challenge. And at the moment, we're finding people more it's dealing with the anxiety around it. So talking to appropriate people, which is why we set up the coaching program, and also talking to people in similar situations. So you kind of feel like you've got the community around you and you're not the only one.
Yeah, very interesting. And we'll put the link in the podcast description about to see where we can find you and your colleague. But I guess, it's a very interesting aspect of personal finance, right? Just like for sports, it's all sort of, I don't use them, but I know you can measure your heartbeat and performance and stuff like that. In personal finance, well, you could always do it with a spreadsheet, but it's very hard to follow when you're taken by your daily routine. So I guess the crisis and staying at home is an opportunity to do so, but also there are different ways to do it today than the traditional ways, which was just with a bank, maybe just a piece of paper sent by the bank every month.
And a lot of the banks actually have got, if you ask them or you look online, if you've got internet banking, quite a few of them have now kind of created their own ways of monitoring your budgeting, which is quite helpful. And they give you kind of a spending breakdown. A lot of the new banks, so as I say, Monzo, Revolut, there are loads of them out there, Moneybox, and some of the apps that kind of sit on top of your current bank account are great at sort of making that easy for you. I think it's really helpful for people who aren't particularly, I relatively have a good handle on where my money's going, but I think if you're not great at understanding that, or you're quite spend happy, or don't keep track of it particularly well, it's really helpful just to look. And I think as soon as you see you're spending £200 a year on, I don't know, coffees, at the moment, you're probably not, but it's that kind of thing where it can highlight. You might there's nothing wrong with buying, a nice coffee every day. And there's no judgment, but it's more if you can't afford it and that's something that you kind of have been taking for granted, potentially that's somewhere you could look to cut back slightly. So I think it's that level of honesty that can really help in order to manage finances. And I know when I've been not been working and been made redundant and had to really look at my finances, I made hard decisions where I was happy to cut back. And then there were certain things where, I wasn't prepared to compromise. And that's different for everyone.
So very interesting. And, best of luck with that. So I think we're going to try to finish with a few quick fire questions. They're fast and easy.
I'll do my best.
First, if you had to choose a completely different career, anything, what would it be?
Oh, I have no idea. I used to say fashion, but probably something like film or the art, definitely more on the creative side.
All right. Any hidden talent, or not so hidden talent, but something that you...
Sadly, no.
There must be something.
Yeah, sadly not so much. I definitely don't have green fingers. I've found this the last few weeks.
Favorite place to go on holidays?
Honestly, I travel so much, and at the moment, I have had to cancel 2 holidays. So I was meant to go to the US hiking, and I'm meant to be going to Peru in September, but it looks like that will probably have to be cancelled as well. So,
so you have a lot on your bucket list.
Right. I have a lot on my bucket list. Yeah,
a lot
so
to look
I think
forward
it'll have
to.
Be somewhere close to home, like Scotland, probably next. I'd like to go to Scotland. There we go. That's the next on my.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Yeah, well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Kate. That's all I've got. But it's been really great to have you on board.
No, thank you.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to our guests who make this possible. Subscribe to never miss an episode. As this is a new broadcast, if you could give us a 5-star review on iTunes and your favorite podcast player, that would be great. Let's work together to accelerate fintech towards the 2030s.